As spoiler season for a set proceeds, we all form our own initial opinions and hot takes, which may or may not pan out long term. One thing that's become clear to me since Uprising's release is that I have greatly underestimated Dromai. Now, by no means am I claiming her as a tier 1 hero. That said, she has far surpassed my initial expectations of how she would perform in Classic Constructed. And certainly a lot of that credit goes to the smart, nay brilliant pioneers putting in the reps with her. Nonetheless, she's doing far better than I thought she would. So today, I'm talking about Dromai, why she's performing better than I expected her to, and what we can learn from the top placing lists. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Yep, Ashwing Lock is a thing, to steal a quote from DC team and local guy, Matt. Hello everyone, and welcome to Dice Commando and Go Again, a fabulous cast. Thanks for tuning in once again. I hope you guys are enjoying watching this competitive season unfold, especially with everything that's about to happen this weekend. I want to take a moment to remind everybody of my source for singles product, which is Fab Foundry. Travis over at Fab Foundry not only runs my favorite and most trusted single site, but he's also an LGS owner himself and a huge proponent of Flesh and Blood. When you do head over there, please use my affiliate link in the description of this video below. I get a small kickback from the purchase, and it helps keep my cardboard addiction running. And thank you to Travis and Fab Foundry. Now, at her core, Dromai is a board state hero of sorts. She gets stronger as the game goes on, or at least that's the plan, right? Her weakness is that multi-attack capable heroes can cut her Dragon Swarm down without too much of a challenge. And since she has to spend cards to reduce dragons, she's in a hard spot from a fatigue standpoint. Even more, the ally mechanic nearly guarantees the opponent any on-hit effects that they may desire. Even with exclusive access to some pretty baller attacks in the Centipies, without the backbreaking Spectre mechanic that her Illusionist colleague brings to the table, in many cases Dromai can face some uphill challenges. And it's for those reasons, combined with the high difficulty of an inherently non-straightforward playstyle, that I had originally questioned her viability. Now, let's be honest, Dromai is a hero with massive thematic appeal. Dropping big old dragons on the table is cool factor 12, and the board state / overrun playstyle makes a certain type of player very happy. But cool factor and win factor don't always go hand in hand. Now, don't get me wrong, Dromai has some near unwinnable matchups for sure, but she also has many positive matchups that are in many ways reminiscent of Prism. My poor Rangers. I was also, much to my chagrin, wrong about the Dawnblade matchup. Being capped at 2 swings per turn, swinging Dawnblade for 13 at an illusion, is still not taking off health. It certainly skewed, I still believe, in Dorinthea's favor, but it's certainly not as one-sided as it looked to be originally on paper. Furthermore, I greatly underestimated the power of some of the larger health big dragons. Many heroes just can't generate that much damage without consuming multiple attacks or sideboarding specifically for Phantasm. This makes their defense slightly draw-dependent or requires consuming valuable cards in order to clear the board. In many cases, this results in a race which can suddenly turn on a dime once those big boys hit the table. Now, while I think Dromai is far from figured out, as if anything ever is in this game, am I right? A ton of credit goes directly to big brains and the control freaks who've developed her to where she is today. Ratios includes which dragons and the sideboard calls are hugely difficult and arguably more impactful in a slower deck, kind of like Dromai. As such, I wanted to take today and look at a few of the top performing Dromai decks from the last few weeks to see what we can learn. I also broke down some similarities and comparisons and some graphics. To that end, I scrubbed the decks from the LSS webpage with the criteria of top 8 of a large event or a skirmish win. This left us with 4 decks. Let's head on over to the large screen for some analysis and breakdown. All right, folks, so what we see over here is a comparison image of the 4 decks. Now, credit where credit is due. I want to make sure that the guys who did this and had their great results are given credit. So going left from right, we have Andres Perez, aka Ace. He's from the Seattle area, or at least I still believe he's up there. He top 8'd Battle Hardened in Portland. We have Jarek Fomakad from Battle Hardened LA. Did a top 8 there. Jamie Faulkner is in the 3rd column from Calling Utrecht with top 8. And then Adam Feifels, I believe it's Feifels, I apologize if that's not correct, but he was also a top 8 at Battle Hardened Los Angeles. So we see some, some pretty good results here. Now, explaining this side by side, and I do want to say, I know this is on here very small. I don't actually expect you to necessarily read this. That's not where I'm going here. We will go through, I promise, we'll go through each group. The images will be easier to see. Well, the reason I'm putting this up as it is, I wanted to kind of show the overall picture of similarity or lack thereof. So the way I did this was each card is on its own row. It's on its own line. And I went through, and if everybody ran the same card in the same quantity, I turned it green, right? So what you can see just at a glance here is looking that roughly 50% of the image or so is green, meaning everybody ran the same card in the same quantity. And if there was mostly the same, like let's say either, in a couple of cases, it's either 3 people ran it and somebody didn't, or if everybody ran it but in maybe different quantities, I turned those yellow, and then there's a couple other lines I turned gray, kind of just as a line for me in my head to talk about special. Gray is also basically the yellow category there. Okay, so again, it's just a the attempt here is just a side-by-side comparison just to kind of easily visualize the similarity / dissimilarity of the decks. And again, we will go through each of these in a larger picture. All right, what you see across the screen right now is my attempt at a visual comparison of the different decks. So what we're using here is a pie chart. You also see it'll probably be down here, like right below me, by the time I do the overlay and editing. But I actually do have the percentages broke out. Now, before we get into this, I do want to point something out. Adept people will notice that these don't add up to 100% on the pie chart, and there's a reason why. Right, the dragons, I calculated the percentage of dragons in the deck. Now, all of this is divided by 80, so it's quantity of said card divided by 80. It's percentage of the 80 card deck. That said, dragons are red, right? So we're technically double counting those. So the reason I did it this way was just to provide an easy visual way to see the differences in the deck, right? So if you compare the percentage, if you compare the pie chart of orange across them or the pie chart of dragons across them, you get a relative size difference in the decks, but they will not add up to 100 because we are double counting cards looking at ones that go in different. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Sorry if you think that's a dumb way to do it, but it's not looking at the composition of the 80 card deck. It's looking at the compositions of it's looking at the percentage of the 80 card deck in each one, right? So that we can look at them back and forth. So anyway, if you don't like the visual, completely fair. I can understand why somebody might not like it the way I did it. I get it. I do have the actual numbers, probably, like I said, probably down here, right? So going through it, this one I found to be very interesting was the red pitch. We had 2 of them at 66.3 and 2 of them at 76.3, right? So you had a very even split there. However, when you go to the blue pitch part of it, right, we see that I believe it's Adam, right, on the end. Let me confirm that. Yeah, so Adam on the end there in the 4th column. All these columns do still track. He was only 12.5% blue, right? So that's very, very small compared to the 20-ish percent run by 2 of them, and then 16.3%. So the Battle Hardened, and that's actually both the Battle Hardened LAs, and remember that was an earlier tournament, right? So that does, clearly the testing had shown over time that more blues were needed by and large. I do find that pretty interesting because in most cases that comes out to 15 or less. That's not a ton of blues, but clearly the testing has shown that these guys don't need it, right? So that's very interesting. Last thing we'll hit on this is just the number of dragons, and I think that might become clear as we start going through which dragons they got to when we get to the reds. But Ace was running 27.5% dragons, 26% basically matched there. And then the other two were running roughly 30% dragons. So now, again, if we go through the dragons, I think it'll make more sense. It looks like there's a lot of sideboard options. And then a couple shout outs on just the yellow cards. 2 of them ran no yellow. And 2 of them ran no yellow, and 2 of them ran 3 yellows, right, which comes out to the 3.8%. So, all right, going in first to the equipment. Equipment total was... it was equivalent except for 1 was running 1 less. Crown of Providence, Flamesteel's Furnace across the board, Footsteps across the board, the weapon across the board for obvious reasons, and then Silken Form across the board. Makes sense. It's got the Quell, it can pop and convert. Pretty darn good. Ghostly Touch run by everybody except Jarek. I think that's certainly a matchup dependent card, right? Obviously, because you're running the Silken Form, which I think you would prefer in most cases, almost all cases. Null Rune Gloves run by only 3 of them. And then the Silent Stilettos, which is an interesting call there, because Phantasmal Footsteps is pretty good for Dromai, being able to do what she wants to do. But Jarek clearly saw a need for Silent Stilettos and went with that. So anyway, relatively similar, right? There's not a ton of bold calls here. Basically, it just comes down to what people felt they had room for, what they thought they might need or not need. Right, going into the blues now, this is where we really go down to it in terms of deck composition, this is where the biggest differences were in terms of total amount. So Rake the Embers and Remembrance Yellow is what Adam was running. 3 That All You Got's by Jamie. I think people need, I don't know, I think everybody should be running 3 That All You Got. It seems really good against Briar. Seems really good. Anyway, you guys get it. Great card. 3 Billing Mirage, that one makes sense. The Ember Moss Senpai, that's an interesting, I think it's a great blue to have, right? Swings for 6, right? Remember that's the big Senpai, right? That's your big boy. And so Jarek was not running that. He actually opted for Energy Potions and Eyes, which is we'll come back to that in a second, but Energy Potion obviously gets him, what he needs to pay for dragons, but we'll see when we go to dragons that's an interesting call. Eye of Ophidia is just that's the Fabled. Passing Mirage is run by everybody, but Adam only had 1 of them. I'm assuming that's just because he was out of space, is my assumption there. 3 Rake the Embers for Andres and Jamie, and then Semblance everybody except Jarek, and then Sweeping Blow. I did think that one was interesting that Adam wasn't running that one. That one seems pretty good to me. So again, I know it's a blue and it doesn't necessarily start your chain if you run it, or if you play it, but still seems pretty good. So, all right, anyway, so we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, up to 17 in most cases, probably running 15, 14, something like that in terms of the blue composition. Right, so let's go into the bulk of this, which is the reds, right? I mean, we saw via the pie charts that red is certainly a large component of these decks. I don't think that should surprise anybody. A, you need to pitch them. B, you need to play them to start your chain. So yeah, one thing that did surprise me, Billing Mirage not present in Andres' deck. That's very interesting. Billing Mirage seems pretty darn good. But clearly he has other plans on what he's going for. So he's very clearly playing this deck in a different way. I find that and when I say I find that curious, I don't mean I think it's dumb. I honestly find it curious. Like I would really like to see reps with the deck and see what his building just seems fundamental, and the fact it's too fundamental for it to be an accident, right? Like they clearly are playing something. So and the Hyperloops team, I assume he's still involved with those guys. They're very crafty, very smart dudes. So I think that's really, let's just say it's interesting, right? And again, I don't mean interesting in a negative way. I mean I do find it, I think it's kind of cool. All right, Burn Them All is pretty much the same, except Adam's only running 1 or 2 of them, CNCs across the board. So Dunebreaker Senpai, so that's the 1/5 with Goes. I do want to point out, so Adam is also running Spears of Surreality, right? It's at the very bottom corner over there. That is also a 1/5 Goes. Both of those have your Phantasm, but I like those cards a lot because they're the red to get your chain started, and then if somebody pops them, you're not losing board state at that point, right? And because you open with that, and then you can start swinging away. And if they pop it, okay, yeah, your turn's over. That stinks, but then you didn't lose anything. So I think those are both pretty cool. Adam had Araina's Prayer and 3 Erase Face. We also had 3 Erase Place in Jarek. Again, those were the early decks, right? At BA Battle Hard in Los Angeles, we had Portland about a month later, where we did not see that. Colleen Trek was in between those, or we did not see that. 3 Fates makes sense. All right, so now let's go through the dragons, and this I think's. I don't necessarily, I'll be honest, I'm not a big enough Dromai player to be able to speak, and I'll just be honest with you guys, I'm not able to speak intelligently to why these guys would have made the choices that they made. So Azalea was in 3 Azaleas in everything except Andres' deck, right? He's the one that comes in and does the Arcane, right? Dromai is in everybody. That guy's baller with the action points. Dominia is in everybody. Dracona Optimi is in everybody except Jarek's. And the reason I think that's interesting is because Jarek, remember, was the one running the energy potions. And that's one of the things I've always wondered about Dracona is like, well, where are you getting, you're not running a ton of blues, you like reds, where are you necessarily getting the cash to pay for him? Like, he's a big boy, you want to see him, but how are you paying for him? I like the energy potion idea, but yet he's not playing Dracona Optimi. So you guys see what I'm saying, right? It's like, oh, you clearly have something to make the cash, which certainly he can use on other dragons. I'm not saying that's a bad play. I just think it's interesting that he has the more potential cash generation, and he's not running it. Kyloria, obviously, Mirror Guy's great, right? You just get him out there and let him sit, and then they have to take damage, and they have to actually block something. They can't just pop. Necria is very interesting to not see that. Necria seems pretty good to me, so I was surprised to not see that in all the decks. But then Uvia is also an interesting one because when she comes in, she makes more, and only one of them. So the fact that we see 1, a 2, a 3, I think it's pretty clear that Uvia is actually probably ends up being a sideboard choice. That's my guess there, right? Again, if you guys know better, let me know in the comments. Let us know in the comments so we can learn. And then Thamai down there makes sense. Tomultai makes sense across the board. Vincerikai, he's the big boy, but he's the aggro dragon, right? So like that guy a lot. If he hits, they have to worry about it. They have to block him or pop him. And then the Endurance Dragon, Yendurai, seems pretty good. Miraging Metamorph, just one of those in Jarek's deck. This one really surprised me, Oasis Respite, that it wasn't, like Oasis Respite just seems good. So clearly he had either just didn't have room for it, trying to do something else. Phantasmaclasm was only run by Ace. I think it's a good card. Let's just strip. Rake the Embers across the board. Ravenous Rabble only in 2 of the decks. That one kind of fits in with what we were talking about earlier with the Centipais. No, I'm not saying, right, it starts your chain, right? And that's what I meant in terms of that, right? It starts your chain. It seems good. You're running a lot of reds. Seems like it's probably coming in for 4 the majority of the time. Unless I'm playing it, then it's always going to flip for you guys. You guys have all been there. Sand Cover makes sense. Sigil Solace, great chain starter as well. Gain 3 health, swing. Sink Below makes sense. And then Sweeping Blow, not in Adam's deck. But he does have Spears. So, whereas the others weren't running that. So, Sweeping Blow does seem pretty good. Especially like Red Sweeping seems pretty good. But that's that. So, very interesting. It's interesting, right? I like looking at the similarities, I think, are obvious. Right, I mean they're green, and the ones that they're running make sense. I personally like the Dunebreaker. I kind of like the Spears thing too. I do find it interesting that Blaze Headlong's not in here. Again, I realize that you have to play something else before that, but that card's really good, but it's clearly just not good enough, right? So that was a learning I had. Blaze, was in my head as something we'd be running. None of these guys are running it, so it very clearly just isn't good enough. So makes sense, right? That's a good learning. The Sweeping Blow thing is interesting. Seems good. But yeah, so that's basically it, right? Just going through this and looking at the comparison. You guys, I was honest with you guys. I'm not a great Dromai player, right? I'm not. I've never played her in real life. I've only jammed her on testing sessions and stuff. So looking at this comparison, it's really put some things in perspective. For me, some things I've taken away. The number of blues that a lot of these guys ran, I think, is really, really eye-opening because they had determined through testing, obviously, that they needed that much, and it worked out for them overall. So I think that's a really good starting point, looking at the deck compositions of these, and then what they chose to choose at the time they chose them. So anyway, folks, that's just me going through it and kind of thinking out loud. Thanks for joining and being patient with my bumbling. There you go. Way to close it out, Andrew. Anyway, I'll shut up. Thanks for checking in, folks. Go Commando.